Windy Brow, April the 21st, 1794. To Mrs. Christopher Crackmanthorpe. I should have answered your letter immediately after the receipt of it. I am much obliged to you for the frankness with which you have expressed your sentiments upon my conduct, and am at the same time extremely sorry that you should think it so severely to be condemned. As you have not sufficiently developed the reasons of your censure, I have endeavoured to discover them, and I confess no other possible objections against my continuing here a few weeks longer suggest themselves, except the expense, and that you may suppose me to be in an unprotected situation. As to the former of these objections, I reply that I drink no tea, that my supper and breakfast are of bread and milk, and my dinner chiefly of potatoes, from choice. In answer to the second of these suggestions, I affirm that I consider the character and virtues of my brother as a sufficient protection. I cannot pass unnoticed that part of your letter in which you speak of my rambling about the country on foot. So far from considering this as a matter of condemnation, I rather thought it would have given my friends pleasure to hear that I had courage to make use of the strength with which nature has endowed me, when it not only procured me infinitely more pleasure than I should have received from sitting in a post-chaise, but was also the means of saving me 30 shillings. In mentioning the inducements which I have to stay at Windy Brow a few weeks longer, it will be unnecessary to speak of the beauty of the country or the pleasantness of the season. To these are added the society of several of my brother's friends, from whom I have received the most friendly attentions, and above all, the society of my brother. I am now 22 years of age, and such have been the circumstances of my life that I may be said to have enjoyed his company only for a very few months. An opportunity now presents itself of obtaining this satisfaction, an opportunity which I could not see pass from me without unspeakable pain. Besides, I not only derive much pleasure, but much improvement from my brother's society. I have regained all the knowledge I had of the French language some years ago, and I have now begun reading Italian. Racedown, June 1797. To Mary Hutchinson. You had a great loss in not seeing Coleridge. He is a wonderful man. His conversation teems with soul, mind, and spirit. Then he is so benevolent, so good-tempered and cheerful, and, like William, interests himself so much about every little trifle. At first I thought him very plain, that is, for about 3 minutes. He is pale and thin, has a wide mouth, thick lips, and not very good teeth, longish, loose-growing, half-curling, rough black hair. But if you hear him speak for 5 minutes, you think no more of them. His eye is large and full, not dark, but grey. Such an eye as would receive from a heavy soul the dullest expression. But it speaks every emotion of his animated mind. It has more of the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling than I ever witnessed. He has fine dark eyebrows and an overhanging forehead. The first thing that was read after he came was William's new poem, The Ruined Cottage, with which he was much delighted. Alfoxton, near Netherstowey, Somersetshire, August the 14th, 1797. Here we are, in a large mansion, in a large park, with 70 head of deer around us. We spent a fortnight at Coleridge's. In the course of that time we heard that this house was to let, applied for it and took it. Our principal inducement was Coleridge's society. It was a month yesterday since we came to Alfoxton. The house is a large mansion, with furniture enough for a dozen families like ours. There is a very excellent garden, well stocked with vegetables and fruit. From the end of the house we have a view of the sea, over a woody meadow country, and exactly opposite the window where I now sit, an immense wood, whose round top from this point has exactly the appearance of a mighty dome. Alfoxton, November the 20th, 1797. We have been on another tour. We set out last Monday evening at 4:30. The evening was dark and cloudy. We went 8 miles, William and Coleridge employing themselves in laying the plan of a ballad to be published with some pieces of William's. William's play is finished and sent to the managers of the Covent Garden Theatre. We have not the faintest expectation that it will be accepted. From the journal written at Alfoxton in 1798. January the 20th, 1798. The green paths down the hillsides are channels for streams. The young wheat is streaked by silver lines of water running between the ridges. The sheep are gathered together on the slopes. After the wet, dark days, the country seems more populous. It peoples itself in the sunbeams. The clustering snowdrops put forth their white heads, the slanting woods of an unvarying brown showing the light through the thin network of their upper boughs. January the 22nd. Walked through the wood to Holford. The day cold, a warm shelter in the hollies capriciously bearing berries. Query, are the male and female flowers on separate trees? January the 26th. Walked upon the hilltops, followed the sheep tracks till we overlooked the larger coombe. Sat in the sunshine. The distant sheep bells, the sound of the stream, the woodman winding along the half-marked road with his laden pony, locks of wool still spangled with the dewdrops, the blue-grey sea shaded with immense masses of cloud, not streaked, the sheep glittering in the sunshine. Set forward before 2 o'clock. Returned a little after 4. January the 27th. Walked from 7 o'clock till 8:30. Upon the whole, an uninteresting evening. January the 30th. William called me into the garden to observe a singular appearance about the moon. A perfect rainbow. Within the bow, one star, only of colours more vivid. The semicircle soon became a complete circle, and in the course of 3 or 4 minutes, the whole faded away. February the 17th. A deep snow upon the ground. William and Coleridge walked to Mr. Bartholomew's and to Stowey. William returned, and we walked through the wood into the coombe to fetch eggs. A deep stillness in the thickest part of the wood, undisturbed except by the occasional dropping of the snow from the holly boughs. No other sound but that of the water, and the slender notes of a redbreast, which sang at intervals. February the 26th. Coleridge came in the morning. Walked with Coleridge nearly to Stowey after dinner. We lay sidelong upon the turf and gazed on the landscape till it melted into more than natural loveliness. The sea very uniform, of a pale greyish blue. Only one distant bay, bright and blue as a sky. Had there been a vessel sailing upon it, a perfect image of delight. March the 1st. A pleasant morning, the sea white and bright and full to the brim. I walked to see Coleridge in the evening. William went with me to the wood. Coleridge very ill. 10th. Coleridge, William and I walked in the evening to the top of the hill. We all passed the morning in sauntering about the park and gardens, the children playing about, the old man at the top of the hill gathering furze. Interesting groups of human creatures, the young frisking and dancing in the sun, the elder quietly drinking in the life and soul of the sun and air. The 15th. I have neglected to set down the occurrences of this week, so I do not recollect how we disposed of ourselves today.
William Wordsworth to Dorothy, October 1799. Went to the ferry, much disgusted with the new erections about Windermere. Next day by Rydal to Grasmere, where we have remained till today. The evening before last, we walked to the upper waterfall at Rydal, and saw it through the gloom. Oh, it was very magnificent. Coleridge was much struck with Grasmere and its neighbourhood. I have much to say to you. You will think my plan a mad one, but I have thought of building a house there, by the lakeside. John would give me £40 to buy the ground. There is a small house at Grasmere empty, which we might take. But of this we will speak.
Journals written at Grasmere. May the 14th, 1800. William and John set off into Yorkshire after dinner at 2:30 o'clock, cold pork in their pockets. I left them at the turning of Lowood Bay under the trees. My heart was so full that I could scarcely speak to William when I gave him a farewell kiss. I sat a long time upon a stone at the margin of the lake, and after a flood of tears my heart was easier. The lake looked to me, I knew not why, dull and melancholy, and the weltering on the shore seemed a heavy sound. Came home by Clappergate. The valley very green, many sweet views up to Rydale, when I could juggle away the fine houses. I resolved to write a journal of the time till William and John return, and I set about keeping my resolve, because I will not quarrel with myself, and because I shall give William pleasure by it when he comes home again. At Rydale, a woman of the village, stout and well-dressed, begged a halfpenny. She had never, she said, done it before, but these hard times. Arrived at home, set some slips of privet. The evening cold had a fire, my face, now flame-coloured. It is 9 o'clock. I shall now go to bed. Oh, that I had a letter from William. Sunday the 18th. Went to church. Slight showers, a cold air. The mountains from this window look much greener, and I think the valley is more green than ever. A little girl from Coniston came to beg. She had lain out all night. Her stepmother had turned her out of doors. Walked to Ambleside in the evening round the lake. The prospect exceeding beautiful from Loughrig Fell. I was overtaken by 2 Cumberland people who complimented me upon my walking. They were going to sell cloth and odd things which they make themselves in Hawkshead and the neighbourhood. John Fisher overtook me on the other side of Rydale. He talked much about the alteration in the times, and observed that in a short time there would only be 2 ranks of people, the very rich and the very poor. Did not reach home till 10 o'clock. Tuesday the 27th. I walked to Ambleside with letters. Only a letter from Coleridge. I expected a letter from William. It was a sweet morning. The ashes in the valley nearly in full leaf, but still to be distinguished. Quite bare on the higher ground. Friday. In the morning went to Ambleside, forgetting that the post does not come till the evening. How was I grieved when I was so informed. As I came past Rydale in the morning, I saw a heron swimming with only its neck out of the water. It beat and struggled amongst the water when it flew away, and was long in getting loose. Thursday, June the 5th. I sat out of doors great part of the day, and worked in the garden. Wrote an answer to Coleridge. The little birds busy making love, and pecking the blossoms and bits of moss off the trees. They flutter about and beneath the trees as I lie under them. I would not go far from home, expecting my brothers. Saturday. I watered the garden and weeded. I did not leave home in the expectation of William and John, and sitting at work till after 11 o'clock, I heard a foot at the front of the house, turn round and open the gate. It was William. After our first joy was over, we got some tea. We did not go to bed till 4 o'clock in the morning. Tuesday the 10th. A very tall woman, tall much beyond the measure of tall women, called at the door. She had on a very long brown cloak and a very white cap, without bonnet. Her face was excessively brown, but it had plainly once been fair. She led a little barefooted child about 2 years old by the hand, and said her husband, who was a tinker, was gone before with the other children. I gave her a piece of bread. Afterwards, on my way to Ambleside, beside the bridge at Rydale, I saw her husband sitting by the roadside, his 2 asses feeding beside him, and the 2 young children at play upon the grass. The man did not beg. I passed on about a quarter of a mile further. I saw 2 boys before me, one about 10, the other about 8 years old, at play chasing a butterfly. They were wild figures, not very ragged, but without shoes and stockings. The hat of the elder was wreathed round with yellow flowers. The younger, whose hat was only a rimless crown, had stuck it round with laurel leaves. They continued at play till I drew very near, and then they addressed me with the begging cant and the whining voice of sorrow. I said, "I served your mother this morning." The boys were so like the woman I could not be mistaken. "Oh," says the elder, "You could not serve my mother, for she's dead, and my father's on at the next town. He's a potter." I persisted in my assertion, and that I would give them nothing. Says the elder, "Let's away," and away they flew like lightning. On my return through Ambleside, I met in the street the mother driving her asses, in the 2 panniers of one of which were the 2 little children. Beggars by William Wordsworth.
She had a tall man's height, or more. No bonnet screened her from the heat. A long, drab-coloured cloak she wore, a mantle reaching to her feet. What other dress she had, I could not know. Only she wore a cap that was as white as snow. In all my walks, through field or town, such figure had I never seen. Her face was of Egyptian brown. Fit person was she for a queen, to head those ancient Amazonian files, or ruling bandit's wife among the Grecian isles. Before me, begging did she stand, pouring out sorrows like a sea, grief after grief. On English land such woes I knew could never be. And yet a boon I gave her, for the creature was beautiful to see, a weed of glorious feature. I left her, and pursued my way, and soon before me did espy a pair of little boys at play, chasing a crimson butterfly. The taller followed with his hat in hand, wreathed round with yellow flowers, the gayest of the land. The other wore a rimless crown, with leaves of laurel stuck about, and they both followed up and down, each whooping with a merry shout. 2 brothers seemed they, 8 and 10 years old, and like that woman's face as gold is like to gold. They bolted on me thus, and lo, each ready with a plaintive whine. Said I, "Not half an hour ago your mother has had alms of mine." "That cannot be," one answered, "she is dead." "Nay, but I gave her pence, and she will give you bread." "She has been dead, sir, many a day." "Sweet boys, you're telling me a lie. It was your mother, as I say, and in the twinkling of an eye." "Come, come," cried one, and without more ado, off to some other play they both together flew.
Sunday the 27th. Very warm. After tea we rode down to Loughrig Fell, visited the White Foxglove, gathered wild strawberries, and walked up to view Rydale. We lay a long time looking at the lake, the shores all dim with the scorching sun. We walked round by Benson's Wood, home. The lake was now most still, and reflected the beautiful yellow and blue and purple and grey colours of the sky. We heard a strange sound in the Bainriggs Wood, as we were floating on the water. It seemed in the wood, but it must have been above it, for presently we saw a raven very high above us. It called out, and the dome of the sky seemed to echo the sound. It called again and again as it flew onwards, and the mountains gave back the sound, a musical bell-like answering to the bird's hoarse voice. August the 31st, Sunday. A great deal of corn in cut in the vale, and the whole prospect, though not tinged with a general autumnal yellow, yet softened down into a mellowness of colouring, which seems to impart softness to the forms of hills and mountains. At 11 o'clock, Coleridge came, when I was walking in the still, clear moonshine in the garden. William was gone to bed, and John also. We sat and chatted till 3:30. Monday morning, the 1st of September. We walked in the wood by the lake. William read Joanna and the Fir Grove to Coleridge. They bathed. The morning was delightful, with something of an autumnal freshness. Coleridge went to bed after tea. The evening somewhat frosty and grey, but pleasant. I broiled Coleridge a mutton chop, which he ate in bed. William was gone to bed. I chatted with John and Coleridge till near 12. Tuesday the 2nd. In the morning they all went to Stickle Tarn. The fair day. There seemed very few people and very few stalls, yet I believe there were many cakes and much beer sold. My brothers came home to dinner at 6 o'clock. It was a lovely moonlight night. The moonlight shone only upon the village. It did not eclipse the village lights, and the sound of dancing and merriment came along the still air. I walked with Coleridge and William up the lane by the church, and then lingered with Coleridge in the garden. John and William were both gone to bed, and all the lights out. Sunday, the 14th. A lovely day. Read Boswell in the house in the morning, and after dinner, under the bright yellow leaves of the orchard. I have long neglected my journal. Friday, the 3rd of October. William walked to Ambleside after dinner. I went with him part of the way. We met an old man, almost double. He had on a coat thrown over his shoulders, above his waistcoat and coat. Under this he carried a bundle and had an apron on and a nightcap. His face was interesting. He had dark eyes and a long nose. He was of Scotch parents, but had been born in the army. He had had a wife, and she was a good woman, and it pleased God to bless us with 10 children. All these were dead but one, of whom he had not heard for many years, a sailor. His trade was to gather leeches, but now leeches were scarce, and he had not the strength for it. He said leeches were very scarce, partly owing to this dry season, but many years they have been scarce. He supposed it owing to their being much sought after, and that they did not breed fast and were slow of growth. Leeches were formerly 2 and 6pence per 100. They are now 30 shillings. He had been hurt in driving a cart, his leg broke, his body driven over, his skull fractured.
Extracts from The Leech Gatherer. Now, whether it were by peculiar grace, a leading from above, a something given, yet it befell that in this lonely place, when up and down my fancy thus was driven, and I with these untoward thoughts had striven, I saw a man before me unawares. The oldest man he seemed that ever wore grey hairs. My course I stopped as soon as I espied the old man in that naked wilderness. Close by a pond, upon the further side, he stood alone. A minute's space, I guess, I watched him, he continuing motionless. To the pool's further margin then I drew, he being all the while before me, full in view. As a huge stone is sometimes seen to lie, couched on the bald top of an eminence, wonder to all who do the same espy, by what means it could thither come, and whence, so that it seems a thing endued with sense, like a sea beast crawled forth, which on a shelf of rock or sand reposeth, there to sun itself. Such seems this man, not all alive or dead, nor all asleep. In his extreme old age, his body was bent double, feet and head coming together in their pilgrimage, as if some dire constraint of pain or rage, of sickness felt by him in times long past, a more than human weight upon his frame had cast. A gentle answer did the old man make, in courteous speech which forth he slowly drew, and him with further words I thus bespake, "What kind of work is that which you pursue? This is a lonesome place for one like you." He answered me with pleasure and surprise, and there was, while he spake, a fire about his eyes. He told me that he to this pond had come to gather leeches, being old and poor, employment hazardous and wearisome, and he had many hardships to endure. From pond to pond he roamed, from moor to moor, housing, with God's good help, by choice or chance, and in this way he gained an honest maintenance.
Tuesday, November the 18th. William and Coleridge set off towards Penrith. William met Sarah Hutchinson at Threlkeld. They arrived at Keswick at tea time. Wednesday, November the 26th. William very well. We had a delightful walk up into Easdale. The tops of the mountains covered with snow, frosty and sunny, the roads slippery. A letter from Mary. A beautiful moonlight night. Sarah and I walked home. William very well and highly poetical. To Samuel Taylor Coleridge, 1801. I take the pen, having put up the bread and a few baked trouts. The first trouts we have had this season. Poor John, dear John. We think of him whenever we see the shape of a trout. He has at last a prospect of sailing. I learned from my Aunt Cookson that a 74-gun ship is ordered to convey them all the way. God bless you, dear Coleridge. We are sadly grieved for your poor eyes and the rest of your complaints, but we sorrow not without hope. Oh, for one letter of perfect uncomplainingness. Poor William, we have put aside all the manuscript poems, and it is agreed between us that I am not to give them up to him even if he asks for them. Good night, dear Coleridge. To Mary Hutchinson, April 1801. My dearest dear Mary, I look forward with joy to seeing you again. You must come in autumn or before. I wish from my heart that William and I could be with you. William is better than he was a while ago. He is taking a stomachache medicine, which I hope will do him good, but his digestion is still very bad. He is always very ill when he tries to alter an old poem. The thrushes are singing divinely in the orchard. It is 7 o'clock. William is lying upon the outside of the bed that has its back to the window. I have the little round green table beside him. We are going to tea and then for a walk. God bless you. I wish that you were here. November the 16th, 1801. William is now at 7 o'clock reading Spencer. Mary is writing beside me. We are quiet and happy. Tuesday the 24th, November 1801. It was very windy, and we heard the wind everywhere about us as we went along the lane, but the walls sheltered us. As we were going along, we were stopped at once at the distance perhaps of 50 yards from our favourite birch tree. It was yielding to the gusty wind with all its tender twigs. The sun shone upon it, and it glanced in the wind like a flying, sunshiny shower. It was a tree in shape with the stem and branches, but it was like a spirit of water. Friday, the 18th of December. Mary and William walked round the 2 lakes. I stayed at home to make bread. I afterwards went to meet them, and I met William. Mary had gone to look at Langdale pikes. It was a cheerful, glorious day. I wrote to Coleridge. Tuesday the 22nd. William composed a few lines of The Pedlar. We stopped a long time to watch a little bird with a salmon-coloured breast, a white cross or T upon its wings, and a brownish back with faint stripes. It began to pick upon the road at the distance of 4 yards from us, and advanced nearer and nearer till it came within the length of William's stick, without any apparent fear of us. As we came upon the white moss, we met an old man who I saw was a beggar by his 2 bags hanging over his shoulder. But half from laziness, half from indifference, I let him pass. He said nothing, and my heart smote me. I turned back and said, "You are begging?" "Aye," says he. I gave him something. William, judging from his appearance, joined in. "I suppose you were a sailor?" "Aye," he replied. "I've been 57 years at sea, 12 of them on board a man of war." He was 75 years of age, had a freshish colour in his cheeks, grey hair, a decent hat with a binding round the edge, the hat worn brown and glossy. His shoes were small, thin shoes, low in the quarters, pretty good. They belonged to a gentleman. We overtook old Fleming at Rydale, leading his little Dutchman-like grandchild along the slippery road. The same face seemed to be natural to them both, the old man and the little child, and they went hand in hand, the grandfather cautious, yet looking proud of his charge. I found Mary at home, in her riding habit, all her clothes being put up. We sat snugly round the fire. I read to them the tale of Constance, also some of the prologue. Wednesday the 23rd. William worked at the ruined cottage and made himself very ill. A broken soldier came to beg in the morning. Friday the 25th, Christmas Day. We received a letter from Coleridge. His letter made us uneasy about him. I was glad I was not by myself when I received it. Saturday the 26th. Grasmere Lake, a beautiful image of stillness, clear as glass, reflecting all things. The wind was up, and the waters sounding. The lake of a rich purple, the fields a soft yellow, the island yellowish green, the copses red-brown, the mountains purple, the church and buildings, how quiet they were. Tuesday the 29th, a fine morning. A thin fog upon the hills which soon disappeared. We passed a pretty cluster of houses at the foot of St. John's Vale. As we ascended the hills it grew very cold and slippery. Luckily, the wind was at our backs and helped us on. We dined at the public house on porridge with a second course of Christmas pies. We were well received by the landlady, and her little Jewish daughter was glad to see us again. The husband a very handsome man. The woman told us of the riches of a Mr. Walker, formerly of Grasmere. We said, "What? Does he do nothing for his relations?" "He has a sickly sister at Grasmere." "Why," said the man, "I dare say, if they had any sons to put forward, he would do it for them. But he had children of his own. N.B. His fortune is above £60,000, and he has 2 children. The landlord went about 1.5 miles with us to put us in the right way. The road was often very slippery, the wind high, and it was nearly dark before we got into the right road. I was often obliged to crawl on all fours, and Mary fell many a time. New Year's Day, 1802. We walked, William and I, towards Martindale. January the 3rd, Sunday. Mary brought us letters from Sarah and Coleridge, and we went with her homewards. I do not recollect how the rest of our time was spent exactly. On Sunday the 17th, went to meet Mary. It was a mild, gentle thaw. She stayed with us till Friday the 22nd of January. On Thursday we dined at Mr. Myers, and on Friday the 22nd we parted from Mary. Before our parting we sat under a wall in the sun near a cottage above Staton Bridge. The field in which we sat sloped downwards to a nearly level meadow, round which the Emont flowed in a small half-circle. Dear Mary. There we parted from her. Friday the 29th, January. William was very unwell, worn out with his bad night's rest. I read to him to endeavour to make him sleep, and then I came into the other room and I read the first book of Paradise Lost. A heart-rending letter from Coleridge. We were sad as we could be. William wrote to him. We talked about William going to London. Saturday, January the 30th. A cold, dark morning. William chopped wood. I brought it in a basket. He asked me to set down the story of Barbara Wilkinson's turtle dove. Barbara is an old maid. She had 2 turtle doves. One of them died, the first year, I think. The other continued to live alone in its cage for 9 years. But for 1 whole year it had a companion and daily visitor, a little mouse that used to come and feed with it. And the dove would carry it and cover it up with its wings and make a loving noise to it. The mouse, though it did not testify equal delight in the dove's company, was yet at perfect ease. The poor mouse disappeared, and the dove was left solitary till its death. It died of a short sickness and was buried under a tree, with funeral ceremony by Barbara and her maidens and 1 or 2 others. On Saturday the 30th, William worked at the Pedlar all the morning. He kept the dinner waiting till 4 o'clock. He was much tired. Friday the 5th of February, a cold, snowy morning. We did not walk. William cut wood a little, sat up late at the Pedlar. Saturday the 6th of February. 2 very affecting letters from Coleridge. Resolved to try another climate. I was stopped in my writing and made ill by the letters. Sunday the 7th. A fine, clear, frosty morning. The eaves drop with the heat of the sun all day long. The ground is thinly covered with snow. Before night the island was quite green. The sun had melted all the snow. William working at his poem. We sat by the fire and did not walk but read the Pedlar, thinking it done. but William could find fault with one part of it. It was uninteresting and must be altered. Poor William. The 8th of February. After dinner we went towards Rydale for letters. Before we had come to the shore of the lake, we met our patient, bow-bent friend with his little wooden box at his back. "Where are you going?" said he. "To Rydale for letters." "I have 2 for you in my box." We lifted up the lid, and there they lay. Poor fellow. He straddled and pushed on with all his might, but we outstripped him far and away. I could not help comparing lots with him. He goes out at that slow pace every morning, and after having wrought a hard day's work returns at night. However weary he may be, takes it all quietly, and though perhaps he neither feels thankfulness nor pleasure when he eats his supper, and has nothing to look forward to but falling asleep in bed, yet I dare say he neither murmurs nor thinks it hard. He seems mechanized to labour. We broke the seal of Coleridge's letters, and I had light enough just to see that he was not ill. I put it in my pocket. At the top of the white moss, I took it to my bosom, a safer place for it. Thursday the 11th. William sadly tired and working at the pedlar. We made up a good fire after dinner, and William brought his mattress out and lay down on the floor. I read to him the life of Ben Jonson and some short poems of his, which were too interesting for him and would not let him go to sleep. I had begun with Fletcher, but he was too dull for me. William rose better. I was cheerful and happy. He got to work again. Friday the 12th. A very fine, bright, clear, hard frost. William working again. I recopied the pedlar, but poor William all the time at work. In the afternoon a poor woman came, she said, to beg. Her father lived to the age of 105. She is a woman of strong bones with a complexion that has been beautiful and remained very fresh last year. But now she looks broken, and her little boy looks thin and pale. I observe this to her. "Aye," she says, "we've all been ill. Our house was nearly unroofed in the storm, and we lived in it so for more than a week." When the woman was gone, I could not help thinking that we are not half thankful enough that we are placed in that condition in life in which we are. We do not so often bless God for this, as we wish for this £50, that £100, etc. February the 14th. William left me at work altering some passages of the pedlar and went into the orchard. The fine day pushed him on to resolve. He said he would go to Penrith. I worked hard, got the writing finished and all quite trim, and put up some letters for Mary Hutchinson, and off he went in his blue spencer and a pair of new pantaloons fresh from London. After dinner, a little before sunset, I walked out about 20 yards above Glowworm Rock. I met a carman, a Highlander, I suppose, with 4 carts. The carman was cheering his horses and talking to a little lass about 10 years of age, who seemed to make him her companion. She ran to the wall and took up a large stone to support the wheel of one of his carts. She was a beautiful creature, and there was something uncommonly impressive in the lightness and joyousness of her manner. Her business seemed to be all pleasure, pleasure in her own motions, and the man looked at her as if he too was pleased, and spoke to her in the same tone in which he spoke to his horses. I reached home and read German till about 9 o'clock. I wrote to Coleridge. Went to bed about 12 o'clock. I slept badly, for my thoughts were full of William. Thursday the 16th. A fine morning, but I had persuaded myself not to expect William, I believe because I was afraid of being disappointed. I ironed all day. He came home just at tea time. I'd only seen Mary Hutchinson for a couple of hours between Emont Bridge and Hartshorn Tree. Mr. Graham said he wished William had been with him the other day. He was riding in a post-chaise, and he heard a strange cry that he could not understand. The sound continued, and he called to the chaise driver to stop. It was a little girl that was crying as if her heart would burst. She had got behind the chaise and her cloak had been caught by the wheel and was jammed in, and it hung there. Mr. Graham took her into the chaise, and her cloak was released from the wheel. But the child's misery did not cease, for the cloak was torn to rags. It had been a miserable cloak before, but she had no other, and it was the greatest sorrow that could befall her. Her name was Alice Fell. She had no parents and belonged to the next town. At the next town, Mr. Graham left money with some respectable people to buy her a new cloak. Alice Fell by William Wordsworth.
The postboy drove with fierce career, for threatening clouds the moon had drowned, when suddenly I seemed to hear a moan, a lamentable sound. As if the wind blew many ways, I heard the sound, and more. It seemed to follow with the chaise, and still I heard it as before. At length I to the boy called out. He stopped his horses at the word. But neither cry, nor voice, nor shout, nor aught else like it could be heard. The boy then smacked his whip, and fast the horses scampered through the rain, and soon I heard upon the blast the voice, and bade him halt again. Said I, alighting on the ground, what can it be, this piteous moan? And there a little girl I found, sitting behind the chaise, alone. My cloak! The word was last and first, and loud and bitterly she wept, as if her very heart would burst, and down from off the chaise she leapt. What ails you, child? She sobbed. Look here. I saw it in the wheel entangled, a weather-beaten rag as air from any garden scarecrow dangled. 'Twas twisted betwixt nave and spoke. Her help she lent, and with good heed together we released the cloak. A wretched, wretched rag indeed. And whither are you going, child, to-night along these lonesome ways? To Durham, answered she, half wild. Then come with me into the chaise. She sat like one past all relief. Sob after sob she forth did send in wretchedness, as if her grief could never, never have an end. My child, in Durham do you dwell? She checked herself in her distress, and said, My name is Alice Fell. I'm fatherless and motherless. And I to Durham, sir, belong. And then, as if the thought would choke her very heart, her grief grew strong, and all was for her tattered cloak. The chaise drove on. Our journey's end was nigh, and sitting by my side, as if she'd lost her only friend, she wept, nor would be pacified. Up to the tavern door we post. Of Alice and her grief I told, and I gave money to the host to buy a new cloak for the old. And let it be of duffle grey, as warm a cloak as man can sell. Proud creature was she the next day, the little orphan, Alice Fell.
Wednesday, March the 3rd. I was so unlucky as to propose to rewrite The Pedlar. William got to work and was worn to death. We did not walk. Thursday. Before we had quite finished breakfast, Calvert's man brought the horses for William. We had a deal to do. Pens to make, poems to put in order for writing, to settle for the press, pack up. Since he left me at 11:30, I'd been putting the drawers into order, laid by his clothes, which he had thrown here and there and everywhere, filed 2 months' newspapers and got my dinner 2 boiled eggs and 2 apple tarts. I will be busy. I will look well and be well when he comes back to me. Oh, the darling. Here is one of his bitter apples. I can hardly find it in my heart to throw it into the fire. Sunday morning. A very fine clear frost. I stitched up The Pedlar, wrote out Ruth, read it with the alterations, then wrote to Mary Hutchinson. Read a little German, and in came William. I did not expect him till tomorrow. How glad I was. March the 13th, Saturday. It was as cold as ever it has been all winter. Very hard frost. William finished Alice Fell, and then wrote the poem of the beggar woman. taken from a woman whom I had seen in May, now nearly 2 years ago. After tea I read to William that account of the little boy belonging to the tall woman, and an unlucky thing it was, for he could not escape from those very words, and so he could not write the poem. He left it unfinished and went tired to bed. Sunday morning. William got up at 9 o'clock, but before he rose he had finished The Beggar Boy, and while we were at breakfast he wrote the poem To a Butterfly. He ate not a morsel, but sat with his shirt neck unbuttoned and his waistcoat open while he did it. The thought first came upon him as we were talking about the pleasure we both always felt at the sight of a butterfly. I told him that I used to chase them a little, but that I was afraid of brushing the dust off their wings, and did not catch them. He told me how he used to kill all the white ones when he went to school because they were Frenchmen. To a Butterfly, by William Wordsworth.
I've watched you now, a full half-hour, self-poised upon that yellow flower, and little butterfly, indeed, I know not if you sleep or feed. How motionless! Not frozen seas more motionless. And then what joy awaits you when the breeze hath found you out among the trees and calls you forth again. This plot of orchard ground is ours. My trees they are, my sister's flowers. Stop here whenever you are weary, and rest as in a sanctuary. Come often to us, fear no wrong, sit near us on the bough. We'll talk of sunshine and of song, and summer days when we were young, sweet childish days, that were as long as 20 days are now.
Monday morning, March the 15th. A sailor who was travelling from Liverpool to Whitehaven called. He was faint and pale when he knocked at the door. A young man, very well dressed. We sat by the kitchen fire talking with him for 2 hours. His name was Isaac Chappell. He had been at sea since he was 15 years old. He was by trade a sailmaker. His last voyage was to the coast of Guinea. He had been on board a slave ship, the captain's name Maxwell, where one man had been killed. A boy put to lodge with the pigs and was half eaten, set to watch in the hot sun till he dropped down dead. He had been away in North America and had travelled 30 days among the Indians, where he had been well treated. He had twice swam from a king's ship in the night and escaped. He said he would rather be in hell than be pressed. He was now going to wait in England to appear against Captain Maxwell. Oh, he's a rascal, sir. He ought to be put in the papers. The poor man had not been in bed since Friday night. He was excessively like my brother John. March the 18th, Thursday. Rydale Vale was full of life and motion. The wind blew briskly, and the lake was covered all over with bright silver waves that were there each the twinkling of an eye, and then others rose up and took their place as fast as they went away. I went through the fields and sat for an hour, afraid to pass a cow. The cow looked at me, and I looked at the cow, and whenever I stirred, the cow gave over eating. Friday. A very rainy morning. I went up into the lane to collect a few green mosses to make the chimney gay against my darling's return. Coleridge came in. His eyes were a little swollen with the wind. I was much affected by the sight of him. William came in soon after. Coleridge went to bed late, and William and I sat up till 4 o'clock. My spirits were agitated very much. Monday, a rainy day. William very poorly. 2 letters from Sarah and 1 from poor Annette. We talked a good deal about Coleridge and other interesting things. We resolved to see Annette and that William should go to Mary. Tuesday. It's about 10 o'clock. A quiet night. The fire flickers and the watch ticks. I hear nothing save the breathing of my beloved as he now and then pushes his book forward and turns over a leaf. Thursday, the 15th of April. It was a threatening, misty morning, but mild. We set off, after dinner, from Ewsmere. The wind was furious, and we thought we must return. We first rested in the large boathouse, then under a furze bush. The wind seized our breath. The lake was rough. We got over into a field to avoid some cows. When we were in the woods, beyond Gowbarrow Park, we saw a few daffodils close to the waterside. We fancied that the sea had floated the seeds ashore, and that the little colony had so sprung up. But as we went along, there were more and yet more. And at last, under the boughs of the trees, we saw that there was a long belt of them along the shore, about the breadth of a country turnpike road. I never saw daffodils so beautiful. They grew among the mossy stones, about and above them. Some rested their heads upon these stones as on a pillow for weariness, and the rest tossed and reeled and danced and seemed as if they verily laughed with the wind that blew upon them over the lake.
I wandered, lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of dancing daffodils. Along the lake, beneath the trees, 10,000 dancing in the breeze. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a laughing company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
Tuesday the 27th. A fine morning. William met me at the top of the hill with his fishing rod in his hand. I turned with him, and we sat on the hill looking to Rydale. In the evening, William began to write The Tinker. Wednesday the 28th of April. William was in the orchard. I went to him. He worked away at his poem. I happened to say that when I was a child, I would not have pulled a strawberry blossom. I left him, and wrote out The Manciple's Tale. At dinner time he came in with a poem of children gathering flowers, but it was not quite finished, and it kept him long off his dinner. It is now done. He is working at the Tinker. He promised me he would get his tea and do no more, but I've got mine an hour and a quarter, and he has scarcely begun his. We have let the bright sun go down without walking. Thursday the 29th. Went to John's Grove. Sat a while at first. Afterwards William lay, and I lay in the trench under the fence. He with his eyes shut and listening to the waterfalls and the birds. William heard me breathing and rustling now and then, but we both lay still and unseen by one another. He thought that it would be sweet to thus lie in the grave, to hear the peaceful sounds of the earth, and just to know that our dear friends were near. Friday, April the 30th. We came into the orchard directly after breakfast and sat there. The lake was calm, the day cloudy. William began to write the poem of the Celandine. Walked backwards and forwards with William. He repeated his poem to me. Then he got to work again and would not give over. He had not finished his dinner till 5 o'clock. Tuesday, the 4th of May. On the Raise, we met a woman with 2 little girls, one in her arms, the other about 4 years old, walking by her side, a pretty little thing, but half-starved. Young as she was, she walked carefully with them. Alas, too young for such cares and such troubles. The mother, when we accosted her, told us how her husband had left her and gone off with another woman, and how she pursued them. Then her fury kindled and her eyes rolled about. She changed again to tears. She was a Cockermouth woman, 30 years of age, a child at Cockermouth when I was. I was moved and gave her a shilling. Friday, the 7th of May. William had slept uncommonly well, so feeling himself strong, he fell to work at the leech gatherer. He wrote hard at it till dinner time. Then he gave over, tired to death. He had finished the poem. Saturday, the 15th of May. A very cold and cheerless morning. It snowed this morning, just like Christmas. We had a melancholy letter from Coleridge at bedtime. It distressed me very much, and I resolved upon going to Keswick the next day. Sunday the 16th. William was at work all the morning. I did not go to Keswick. Saturday, the 22nd of May. A very hot morning. A hot wind, as if coming from a sand desert. We met Coleridge. We sat a long time under the wall of a sheepfold. Had some interesting, melancholy talk about his private affairs. We drank tea at a farmhouse. The woman was very kind. There was a woman with 3 children travelling from Workington to Manchester. The woman served them liberally. Afterwards she said that she never suffered any to go away without a trifle. The woman at whose house we drank tea the last time was rich and senseless. She said she never served any but their own poor. Coleridge came home with us. Monday the 31st. My tooth broke today. They will soon be gone. Let that pass. I shall be beloved. I want no more. Thursday the 3rd of June, 1802. Yesterday morning William walked as far as the Swan with Aggie Fisher, who was going to attend upon Gone's dying infant. She said, "There are many heavier crosses than the death of an infant," and went on. "There was a woman in this vale who buried 4 grown-up children in 1 year, and I have heard her say, when many years were gone by, that she had more pleasure in thinking of those 4 than of her living children. For as children get up and have families of their own, their duty to their parents wears out and weakens." A very affecting letter came from Mary Hutchinson while I was sitting in the window reading Milton's Penseroso to William. I answered this letter before I went to bed. Thursday, the 10th of June. Coleridge came in with a sackful of books and a branch of mountain ash. He had been attacked by a cow. To Richard Wordsworth, Grasmere, 10th of June, 1802. My dear brother, William received your letter on Monday morning. I am considerably better than I was when I wrote you last, though far from well. I have had the most severe cold I have ever had in all my life, and it has taken hold both of my strength and my looks. I will make no comments upon the intelligence which William communicated to you in his last, except that I do not doubt that, if his health is so good that he can go on with those employments in which he has lately been engaged, his marriage will add to his comfort and happiness. Mary Hutchinson is a most excellent woman. I have known her long, and I know her thoroughly. She has been a dear friend of mine, is deeply attached to William, and is disposed to feel kindly to all his family. I shall continue to live with my brother William, but he, having nothing to spare, nor being likely to have, at least for many years, I am obliged, I need not say how much he regrets this necessity, to set him aside, and I will consider myself as boarding through my whole life. £60 a year is the sum which would entirely gratify all my desires. I cannot look forward to the time when, with my habits of frugality, I could not live comfortably on that sum. You never talk about coming to see us. I wish you would. Grasmere is a sweet place, and you would have plenty of sport in fishing if you have not lost the art. Wednesday, the 16th of June. I wrote to Mary after dinner, while William sat in the orchard. I spoke of the little birds keeping us company, and William told me that that very morning a bird had perched upon his leg. The swallows came to the sitting-room window, as if wishing to build, but I'm afraid they will not have courage for it. But I believe they will build in my room window. They twitter and make a bustle in a little cheerful song, hanging against the panes of glass with their soft white bellies close to the glass and their forked fish-like tails. They swim round, and again they come. Saturday the 19th. The swallows were very busy under my window this morning. Coleridge, when he was last here, told us that for many years, there being no Quaker meeting at Keswick, a single old Quaker woman used to go regularly alone every Sunday to attend the meeting-house, and there used to sit and perform her worship alone. On Thursday morning, Miss Hudson of Workington called. She said, "I sow flowers in the parks several miles from home, and my mother and I visit them and watch them, how they grow. This may show that botanists may often be deceived when they find rare flowers growing far from houses." Friday, June the 25th. I went just before tea into the garden. I looked up at my swallow's nest, and it was gone. It had fallen down. Poor little creatures. They could not themselves be more distressed than I was. I went upstairs to look at the ruins. They lay in a large heap upon the window ledge. These swallows had been 10 days employed in building this nest, and it seemed to be almost finished. I had seen them sitting together side by side in their unfinished nest, both morning and night. On Thursday morning, the 29th of July, we arrived in London. After various troubles and disasters, we left London on Saturday morning. We mounted the Dover coach at Charing Cross. It was a beautiful morning. The city, St. Paul's, with the river and a multitude of little boats, made a most beautiful sight as we crossed Westminster Bridge. At first, the rich, populous, wide-spreading woody country about London, then the River Thames, ships sailing, chalk cliffs, trees, little villages. Afterwards, Canterbury, hop grounds on either side of the road. Then we came to a common, the race ground, an elevated plain, villages among trees in the bed of a valley at our right, and rising above this valley, green hills scattered over with wood, neat gentlemen's houses. As we went along, the country was beautiful and hilly, with cottages lurking under the hills, and their little plots of hop ground like vineyards. It was a bad hop year. A woman on the top of the coach said to me, "It is a sad thing for the poor people, for the hop gathering is the woman's harvest. There is employment about the hops for women and children." We saw the castle at Dover and the sea beyond 4 or 5 miles before we reached it. It was near dark when we reached Dover. We were told that a packet was about to sail, and we went down to the custom house in half an hour, had our luggage examined, etc., etc. We arrived at Calais at 4 o'clock on Sunday morning, the 31st of July. We found out Annette and C. chez Madame Avril, dans la rue de la Tête d'Or. We lodged opposite 2 ladies in tolerably decent-sized rooms, but badly furnished. The weather was very hot. We walked by the seashore almost every evening with Annette and Caroline, or William and I alone. It was a pretty sight to see as we walked upon the sands, when the tide was low, perhaps 100 people bathing about a quarter of a mile distant from us. And we had delightful walks after the heat of the day was past, seeing far off in the west the coast of England like a cloud crested with Dover Castle, which was but like the summit of the cloud. The reflections in the water were more beautiful than the sky itself, purple waves, brighter than precious stones for ever melting away upon the sands. On Sunday the 29th of August, we left Calais at 12 o'clock in the morning, and landed at Dover at 1 on Monday the 30th. We looked upon France with many a melancholy and tender thought. We mounted the coach and arrived in London at 6, the 30th of August. We stayed in London till Wednesday the 22nd of September, and arrived at Gallows Hill on Friday. September the 24th. Mary first met us in the avenue. She looked so fat and well that we were made very happy by the sight of her. September the 29th, 1802. To Mrs. Marshall. We were detained in London by a succession of unexpected events. The arrival of my brother Christopher, then of my brother John. We leave Gallows Hill on Monday morning, immediately after my brother William's marriage. We expect to reach Grasmere on Wednesday evening. William, Mary and I go together in a post-chaise. I half dread the concentration of all tender feelings, past, present and future, which will come upon me on the wedding morning. There never lived on earth a better woman than Mary Hutchinson. It was delightful to see all our brothers, particularly John, after his return from India. He was in perfect health and excellent spirits. On Monday, the 4th of October, 1802, my brother William was married to Mary Hutchinson. I slept a good deal of the night, and rose fresh and well in the morning. At a little after 8 o'clock, I saw them go down the avenue towards the church. William had parted from me upstairs. I kept myself as quiet as I could, but when I saw the 2 men running up the walk, coming to tell us it was over, I could stand it no longer, and threw myself on the bed, where I lay in stillness, neither hearing nor seeing anything till Sarah came upstairs to me and said, "They are coming." This forced me from the bed, where I lay, and I moved, I knew not how, straight forward, faster than my strength could carry me, till I met my beloved William and fell upon his bosom. He led me to the house, and there I stayed to welcome my dear Mary. As soon as we had breakfasted, we departed. It rained when we set off. Poor Mary was much agitated when she parted from her brothers and sisters and her home. We arrived at Grasmere at about 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening. I cannot describe what I felt. We went by candlelight into the garden and were astonished at the growth of the brooms, Portugal laurels, etc., etc. On Friday, Mary and I walked first upon the hillside, then in view of Rydale. The first walk that I had taken with my sister. Recollections of a tour made in Scotland, A.D. 1803. First week. William and I parted from Mary on Sunday afternoon, August the 14th, 1803. And William, Coleridge and I left Keswick on Monday morning the 15th at 20 minutes after 11 o'clock. The day was very hot. We walked up the hills and along all the rough road, which made our walking half the day's journey. Travelled under the foot of Carrick, a mountain covered with stones on the lower part. Above it is very rocky, but sheep pasture there. We saw several where there seemed to be no grass to tempt them. At Grisdale our horse backed upon a steep bank where the road was not fenced, just above a pretty mill at the foot of the valley. And we had a second threatening of a disaster in crossing a narrow bridge between the two dales. Slept at Mr. Younghusband's public house, Heskett Market. In the evening, walked to Culbeck Falls, a delicious spot in which to breathe out a summer's day. Limestone rocks, hanging trees, pools and water breaks. Tuesday, August the 16th. Past Rose Castle upon the Col Dew, an ancient building of red stone with sloping gardens, an ivied gateway, velvet lawns, old garden walls, trim flower borders with stately and luxuriant flowers. We walked up to the house and stood some minutes watching the swallows that flew about restlessly. They flung their shadows upon the sun-bright walls of the old building. The shadows glanced and twinkled, interchanged and crossed each other, expanded and shrunk up, appeared and disappeared every instant. As I observed to William and Coleridge, seeming more like living things than the birds themselves. Dined at Carlisle. The town in a bustle, with the assizes. So many strange faces known in former times and recognised. And together with the noise, the fine ladies, etc., they put me into confusion. This day, Hatfield was condemned. I stood at the door of the gaoler's house, where he was. William entered the house and Coleridge saw him. I fell into conversation with the debtor, who told me in a dry way that he was far over-learned, and another man observed to William that we might learn from Hatfield's fate not to meddle with pen and ink. We gave a shilling to my companion, whom we found out to be a friend of the family, a fellow sailor with my brother John in Captain Wordsworth's ship. To Longtown. Not very interesting, except from the long views over the flat country. Wednesday, August the 17th. We enter Scotland by crossing the River Sark. On the Scotch side of the bridge the ground is unenclosed pasturage. It was very green, and scattered over with that yellow-flowered plant which we call grunzel. The hills heave and swell prettily enough. Cattle feeding, a few cornfields near the river. At the top of the hill opposite is Springfield, a village built by Sir William Maxwell, a dull uniformity in the houses, as is usual when all built at one time, each just big enough for 2 people to live in, and in which a family, large or small as it may happen, is crammed. There the marriages are performed. Further on is Gretna Green, upon a hill and among trees. This sounds well, but it is a dreary place. The stone house dreary and miserable, with broken windows. Dined at Annan. The town of Annan made me think of France and Germany. Many of the houses large and gloomy, the size of them outrunning the comforts. One thing which was like Germany pleased me. The shopkeepers express their calling by some device or painting. Bread bakers have biscuits, loaves, cakes painted on their window shutters. Blacksmiths, horses' shoes, iron tools, etc., etc. Reached Dumfries at about 9 o'clock. Market day. Met crowds of people on the road, and every one had a smile for us and our car. Thursday, August the 18th. Went to the churchyard where Burns is buried. A bookseller accompanied us. He showed us the outside of Burns's house, where he had lived the last 3 years of his life, and where he died. It has a mean appearance, whitewashed, dirty about the doors, as almost all Scottish houses are, flowering plants in the windows. Went on to visit his grave. He lies at a corner of the churchyard, and his second son, Francis Wallace, beside him. There is no stone to mark the spot, but 100 guineas have been collected to be expended on some sort of a monument. We looked at the grave with melancholy and painful reflections, repeating to each other his own verses. Is there a man whose judgment clear can others teach the course to steer, yet runs himself life's mad career, wild as the wave?
Here let him pause, and through a tear survey his grave.
The poor inhabitant below was quick to learn and wise to know, and keenly felt the friendly glow and softer flame.
But thoughtless follies laid him low, and stained his name.
We were glad to leave Dumfries, which is no agreeable place to them who do not love the bustle of a town that seems to be rising up to wealth. We could think of little else but poor Burns, and his moving about on that unpoetic ground. Friday, August the 19th. About 1.5 miles from Drumlanrig is a turnpike gate at the top of a hill. We left our car with the man and turned aside into a field where we looked down upon the Nith, which runs far below in a deep and rocky channel. The banks woody, the view pleasant down the river towards Thornhill, an open country, cornfields, pastures and scattered trees. Our road led us down the hill to the side of the Nith, and we travelled along its banks for some miles. We were to have given our horse meal and water at a public house in one of the hamlets we passed through, but missed the house. For as is common in Scotland, it was without a signboard. Travelled on, still beside the Nith, till we came to a turnpike house, which stood rather high on the hillside, and from the door we looked a long way up and down the river. The air coldish, the wind strong. We asked the turnpike man to let us have some meal and water. I went into the house. There was an old man with a grey plaid over his shoulders, reading a newspaper. On the shelf lay a volume of the Scotch Encyclopedia, a history of England, and some other books. The man of the house came back, and we began to talk. He was very intelligent, had travelled all over England, Scotland and Ireland as a gentleman's servant, and now lived alone in that lonesome place. He said he was tired of his bargain, and he had indeed a troublesome office, for coal carts without number were passing by, and the drivers seemed to do their utmost to cheat him. There is always something peculiar in the house of a man living alone. This was but half furnished, yet nothing seemed wanting for his comfort, though a female who had travelled half as far would have needed 50 other things. He had no other meat or drink in the house but oat bread and cheese. The cheese was made with the addition of seeds and some skimmed milk. He gave us of his bread and cheese and milk, which proved to be sour. William lay under the wind in a cornfield below the house, being not well enough to partake of the milk and the bread. Coleridge gave our host a pamphlet, The Crisis of the Sugar Colonies. There was a politeness and a manly freedom in this man's manners which pleased me very much. He told us that he had served a gentleman, a captain in the army. The captain's whole delight from morning till night, and the long year through, was in field sports. He would be on his feet the worst days in winter, and wade through snow up to the middle after his game. If he had company, he was in tortures till they were gone, He would then throw off his coat and put on an old jacket not worth half a crown. He drank his bottle of wine every day, and 2 if he had better sport than usual. Ladies sometimes came to stay with his wife, and he would often carry them out in an Irish jaunting car, and if they vexed him, he would choose the dirtiest roads possible and spoil their clothes by jumping in and out of the car and treading upon them. The man gave us an account of his farm where he had lived, which was so cheap and pleasant that we thought we should have liked to have had it ourselves. Soon after leaving the turnpike house, we turned up a hill to the right. The road for a little way was very steep, bare hills with sheep. After ascending a little while, we heard the murmur of a stream far below us, and saw it flowing downwards on our left towards the Nith, and before us between steep green hills coming along a winding valley. The simplicity of the prospect impressed us very much. We now felt that we were in Scotland. After some time, our road took us upwards towards the end of the valley. Now the steeps were heathy all around. Just as we began to climb the hill, we saw 3 boys who came down the cleft of a brow on our left. One carried a fishing rod, and the hats of all were braided with honeysuckles. They ran after one another as wanton as the wind. I cannot express what a character of beauty those few honeysuckles and the hats of the 3 boys gave to the place. Our little lads, before they had gone far, were joined by some 6 of their companions, all without shoes and stockings. They told us they lived at Wanlock Head, the village above, pointing to the top of the hill. They went to school and learned Latin, Virgil, and some of them Greek, Homer. But when Coleridge began to inquire further, off they ran, poor things, I suppose afraid of being examined. When, after a steep ascent, we had reached the top of the hill, we saw a village about half a mile before us, on the side of another hill. Nothing grew upon this ground, all the hills above or below but heather. Yet round about the village, which consisted of a great number of huts, all alike and all thatched, with a few larger slated houses among them, and a single modern-built one of considerable size, were 100 patches of cultivated ground, potatoes, oats, hay and grass. We were struck with the sight of haycocks fastened down with aprons, sheets, pieces of sacking, as we supposed to prevent the wind from blowing them away. We afterwards found that this practice was very general in Scotland. Every cottage seemed to have its little plot of ground, fenced by a ridge of earth. This plot contained 2 or 3 different divisions, kale, potatoes, oats, hay, the houses all standing in lines, or never far apart. The cultivated ground was all together also, and made a very strange appearance with its many greens among the dark brown hills, neither tree nor shrub growing. It was indeed a wild and singular spot, to use a woman's illustration, like a collection of patchwork. The village, as we guessed, is inhabited by miners. The mines belong to the Duke of Queensberry. I must mention that we met another little fellow about 6 years old, carrying a bundle over his shoulder. He seemed poor and half-starved, and was scratching his fingers, which were covered with the itch. He was a miner's son, and lived at Wanlock Head. Did not go to school, but this was probably on account of his youth. I mention him because he seemed to be a proof that there was poverty and wretchedness among these people, though we saw no other symptoms of it. Our road turned to the right, and we saw, at the distance of less than a mile, a tall, upright building of grey stone, with several men standing upon the roof, as if they were looking out over the battlements. It stood beyond the village upon higher ground, as if presiding over it, a kind of enchanter's castle. When we drew nearer, we saw, coming out of the side of the building, a large machine or lever in appearance like a great forge hammer, as we supposed, for raising water out of the mines. It heaved upwards once in half a minute with a slow motion, and seemed to rest to take breath at the bottom, its motion being accompanied with a sound between a groan and jike. It seemed to have made the first step from brute matter to life and purpose, showing its progress by great power. William made a remark to this effect, and Coleridge observed that it was like a giant with one idea. After ascending a considerable way, we began to descend again, and now we met a team of horses dragging an immense tree to the lead mines to repair or add to the building, and presently after we came to a cart with another large tree and one horse left in it, right in the middle of the highway. We were a little out of humour, thinking we must wait till the team came back. There were men and boys without number, all staring at us. After a little consultation, they set their shoulders to the cart, and with a good heave, all at once they moved it, and we passed along. These people were decently dressed, and their manners decent. There was no hooting or impudent laughter. Lead Hills, another mining village, was the place of our destination for the night. The village and the mines belonged to Lord Hopetoun. We passed a decent-looking inn, the Hopetoun Arms, but the house of Mrs. Otto, a widow, had been recommended to us with high encomiums. We had a fire lighted in our dirty parlour. Tea came after a reasonable waiting, and the fire, with the gentle aid of twilight, furnished up the room into cheerful comfort. Coleridge was weary, but William and I walked out after tea. We talked with one of the miners. He made use of a noticeable expression, saying that they were very peaceable people, considering they lived so much underground. Wages were about £30 a year. They had land for potatoes, warm houses, plenty of coals, and only 6 hours' work each day, so that they had their leisure for reading if they chose. He said the place was healthy, that the inhabitants lived to a great age, and indeed we saw no appearance of ill health in their countenances. But it is not common for people working in lead mines to be healthy, and I have heard since that it is not a healthy place. However this may be, they are unwilling to allow it, for the landlady the next morning, when I said to her, "You have a cold climate," replied, "Aye, but it is very healthsome." Saturday, August the 20th. Left Lead Hills at 9 o'clock, regretting much that we could not stay another day, that we might have made more minute inquiries respecting the manner of living of the miners. The air was keen and cold. We might have supposed it to be 3 months later in the season and 2 hours earlier in the day. The landlady had not lighted us a fire, so I was obliged to get myself toasted in the kitchen, and when we set off I put on both grey cloak and spencer. Travelled through several reaches of the glen which somewhat resembled the valley of Mennock on the other side of Wanlock Head, but it was not near so beautiful. The forms of the mountains did not melt so exquisitely into each other. We had been advised to go along the new road which would have carried us down the vale, but we met some travellers who recommended us to climb the hill and go by the village of Crawford John as being much nearer. The air was cold and clear, the sky blue. We walked cheerfully along in the sunshine, each of us alone. Only William had the charge of the horse and car, so he sometimes took a ride, which did but poorly recompense him for the trouble of driving. I never travelled with more cheerful spirits than this day. After some time, we descended towards a broad vale. We inquired the road of a middle-aged man dressed in a shabby black coat at work in one of the hayfields. He looked like the minister of the place, and when he spoke we felt assured that he was so. Our car wanted mending in the wheel, and we asked him if there was a blacksmith in the village. Yes, he replied. But when we showed him the wheel, he told William that he might mend it himself without a blacksmith, and he would put him in the way. So he fetched the hammer and nails, and gave his directions, which William obeyed, and repaired the damage entirely to his own satisfaction and the priest's, who did not offer to lend any assistance himself, not as if he would not have been willing in case of need, but as if it were more natural for him to dictate, and because he thought it more fit that William should do it himself. Left the village behind us. Our friend accompanied us to show us the way, and Coleridge and he had a scientific conversation concerning the uses and properties of lime and other manures. He seemed to be a well-informed man. Somewhat pedantic in his manners, but this might be only the difference between Scotch and English. After a long descent we came to some plantations, which were not far from Douglas Mill. Douglas Mill is a single house, a large inn, being one of the regular stages between Longtown and Glasgow. As soon as our car stopped at the door, we felt the difference. At an English inn of this size, a waiter, or the master or mistress would have been at the door immediately, but we remained some time before anybody came. Then a barefooted lass made her appearance, but she only looked at us and went away. The mistress, a remarkably handsome woman, showed us into a large parlour. We ordered mutton chops, and I finished my letter to Mary, writing on the same window ledge on which William had written to me 2 years before. Sunday, August the 21st. The banks of the Clyde from Lanark to the falls rise immediately from the river. They are lofty and steep and covered with wood. The road to the falls is along the top of one of the banks, and to the left you have a prospect of the open country, cornfields and scattered houses. To the right, over the river, the country spreads out, as it were, into a plain covered over with hills. There were endless pastures overgrown with broom and scattered trees, without hedges or fences of any kind, and no distinct footpaths. It was delightful to see the lasses in gay dresses running like cattle among the broom, making their way straight forward towards the river, here and there as it might chance. They waded across the stream, and when they had reached the top of the opposite bank, sat down by the roadside, about half a mile from the town, to put on their shoes and cotton stockings, which they brought tied up in pocket handkerchiefs. The porter's lodge is about a mile from Lanark, and the lady's house, for the whole belongs to a lady whose name I have forgotten, is upon a hill at a little distance. We walked, after we had entered the private grounds, perhaps 200 yards along a gravel carriage road, then came to a little side gate which opened upon a narrow gravel path under trees, and in a minute and a half or less were directly opposite to the great waterfall. I was much affected by the first view of it. The majesty and strength of the water struck me with astonishment, which died away, giving place to more delightful feelings. The waterfall, Cora Lynn, is composed of 2 falls. The basin which receives the fall is enclosed by noble rocks, with trees, chiefly hazels, birch and ash, growing out of their sides whenever there is any hold for them. A lady and gentleman, more expeditious tourists than ourselves, came to the spot. Coleridge, who is always good-natured enough to enter into conversation with anybody whom he meets in his way, began to talk with a gentleman, who observed that it was a majestic waterfall. Coleridge was delighted with the accuracy of the epithet, particularly as he had been settling in his own mind the precise meaning of the words grand, majestic, sublime, etc., and had discussed the subject with William at some length the day before. "Yes, sir," says Coleridge, "it is a majestic waterfall." "Sublime and beautiful," replied his friend. Poor Coleridge could make no answer, and not very desirous to continue the conversation, came to us and related the story, laughing heartily. After dinner, set off towards Hamilton, but on foot, for we had to turn aside to the Cartland Rocks, and our car was to meet us on the road. A guide attended us. His method of walking and very quick steps soon excited our attention. I could hardly keep up with him. He paddled by our side, just reaching to my shoulder like a little dog, with his long snout pushed before him, for he had an enormous nose, and walked with his head foremost. The neighbourhood of Lanark is exceedingly pleasant. Our guide pointed to the situation of the Cartland Crags. We were to cross a narrow valley and walk down on the other side, and then we would be at the spot. But the little fellow made a sharp turn down a footpath to the left, saying, "We must have some conversation here." He paddled on with his small pawing feet till we came right opposite to a gentleman's house on the other side of the valley, when he halted, repeating some words, I have forgotten what, which were taken up by the most distinct echo I ever heard. It shouted the names of our far-side friends in the very tone in which William and Coleridge spoke. But it seemed to make a joke of me, and I could not help laughing at my own voice. It was so shrill and pert. It had been dark long before we reached Hamilton, and William had some difficulty in driving the tired horse through the town. At the inn, they hesitated about being able to give us beds, the house being brim-full. We were rather alarmed for our accommodations during the rest of the tour, supposing the house to be filled with tourists. Monday, August the 22nd. Immediately after breakfast, walked to the Duke of Hamilton's house to view the picture gallery, chiefly the famous picture of Daniel in the Lion's Den by Rubens. It is a large building, without grandeur, a heavy, lumpish mass. We entered the gate, passed the porter's lodge, where we saw nobody, and stopped at the front door, as William had done 2 years before with Sir William Rush's family. We were met by a little mean-looking man, shabbily dressed, out of livery, who we found was the porter. After scanning us over, he told us that we ought not to have come to that door. We said we were sorry for the mistake, but as one of our party had been there 2 years before and was admitted by the same entrance, we had supposed it was the regular way. After many hesitations, and having kept us 5 minutes waiting in the large hall while he went to consult with the housekeeper, he informed us that we could not be admitted at that time. the housekeeper being unwell, but that we might return in an hour. We asked if we might be permitted to walk in the park in the meantime, and he told us that this would not be agreeable to the Duke's family. We returned to the inn discontented enough, quitted Hamilton at about 11 o'clock. Tuesday, August the 23rd. Glasgow. A cold morning. Walked to the bleaching ground, a large field bordering on the Clyde, the banks of which are perfectly flat. This field, the whole summer through, is covered with women of all ages and children and young girls spreading out their linen and watching it while it bleaches. In the middle of the field is a wash-house, whither the inhabitants of this large town, rich and poor, send or carry their linen to be washed. There are 2 very large rooms, each with a cistern in the middle for hot water, and all round the rooms are benches for the women to set their tubs upon. Both the rooms were crowded with washers. There might be 100 or 2 or even 3. The shops at Glasgow are large and like London shops, and we passed by the largest coffee room I ever saw. You look across the piazza of the Exchange and see to the end of the coffee room, where there is a circular window, the width of the room. Perhaps there might be 30 gentlemen sitting on the circular bench of the window, each reading a newspaper. They had the appearance of men seen at the extremity of the opera house, diminished into puppets. I am sorry I did not see the high church. Both William and I were tired, and it rained very hard after we left the bleaching ground. Besides, I am less eager to walk in a large town than anywhere else, so we put it off and have since repented of my irresolution. Dined and left Glasgow at about 3 o'clock in a heavy rain. Arrived at Dumbarton before it was dark, having pushed on briskly that we might have start of a traveller who was following us as fast as he could in a gig. Every front room was full, and we were afraid we should not have been admitted. They put us into a little parlour, dirty and smelling of liquors, the table uncleaned and not a chair in its place. We were glad, however, of our sorry accommodation. While tea was preparing, we lolled at our ease, and though the room window overlooked the stable yard, and at our entrance there appeared to be nothing but gloom and unloveliness, yet while I lay stretched upon the carriage cushions on 3 chairs, I discovered a little side peep which was enough to set the mind at work. It was no more than a smoky vessel lying at anchor, with its bare masts, a clay hut and the shelving bank of the river, with a green pasture above. Perhaps you will think that there is not much in this, as I describe it. It is true, but the effect produced by these simple objects as they happened to be combined, together with the gloom of the evening, was exceedingly wild. We went early to bed, but poor Coleridge could not sleep for the noise at the street door. Wednesday, August the 24th. Left Dumbarton at about 11 o'clock. The sky was cheerless and the air ungenial, which we regretted as we were going to Loch Lomond and wished to greet the first of the Scottish lakes with our cheerfullest and best feelings. Before we came to Loch Lomond, the vale widened and became less populous. We climbed over a wall into a large field to have a better view of the lake than from the road. The reach of the lake is very magnificent. The outlet of the lake is very insignificant. The bulk of the river is frittered away by small alder bushes. The ground had a swampy appearance, and here the vale spreads out wide and shapeless, as if the river were born to no inheritance, had no sheltering cradle, no hills of its own. We ordered tea when we reached the inn, and desired the girl to light us a fire. She replied, "I dinna ken whether she'll give fire," meaning her mistress. We told her we did not wish her mistress to give fire, we only desired her to let her make it, and we would pay for it. The girl brought in the tea things, but no fire, and when I asked if she was coming to light it, she said her mistress was not very willing to give fire. At last, however, on our insisting upon it, the fire was lighted. We got tea by candlelight, and spent a comfortable evening. I had seen the landlady. Her countenance corresponded with the unkindness of denying us a fire on a cold night, for she was the most cruel and hateful-looking woman I ever saw. Thursday, August the 25th. After breakfast, William and I went down to the waterside. While lingering by the shore, we began to talk with a man who offered a rows to Inch Tavanach, but the sky began to darken, and the wind being high, we doubted whether we should venture. Presently after, Coleridge joined us, and we determined to go to the island. It rained a little when we landed, and I took my cloak, which afterwards served us to sit down upon in our road up the hill. This island belongs to Sir James Calhoun, who has made a convenient road that winds gently to the top of it. We had not climbed far before we were stopped by a sudden burst of prospect so singular and beautiful that it was like a flash of images from another world. We stood with our backs to the hill of the island which we were ascending, and which shut out Ben Lomond entirely, and all the upper part of the lake, and we looked towards the foot of the lake, scattered over with islands without beginning and without end. The lake was lost under the low and distant hills, and the islands lost in the lake, which was all in motion with travelling fields of light or dark shadows under rainy clouds. The islands were of every possible variety of shape and surface, hilly and level, large and small, bare, rocky, pastoral or covered with wood. There were bays innumerable, straits or passages like calm rivers, landlocked lakes, and to the main waters stormy promontories. Wherever we looked, it was a delightful feeling that there was something beyond. Arrived at the inn at about 12 o'clock and prepared to depart immediately. When we were leaving the door, a party with smart carriage and servants drove up, and I observed that the people of the house were just as slow in their attendance upon them as on us, with one single horse, an outlandish Hibernian vehicle. Sunday, August the 28th. We were desirous to have crossed the mountains above Glengyle to Glenfalloch, at the head of Loch Lomond, but it rained so heavily that it was impossible. When beginning to descend the hills towards Loch Lomond, we overtook two girls, who told us we could not cross the ferry till evening, for the boat was gone with a number of people to church. One of the girls was exceedingly beautiful. I never heard the English language sound more sweetly than from the mouth of the elder of these girls, while she stood at the gate answering our inquiries, her face flushed with the rain. They told us we might sit in the ferry house till the return of the boat, went in with us, and made a good fire as fast as possible to dry our wet clothes. We learnt that the taller was the sister of the ferryman, and had been left in charge with the house for the day, and that the other was his wife's sister. They were both exceedingly desirous to get me what I wanted to make me comfortable. I was to have a gown and petticoat of the mistress's, so they turned out her whole wardrobe upon the parlour floor, talking Erse to one another and laughing all the time. It was long before they could decide which of the gowns I was to have. They chose at last, no doubt thinking that it was the best, a light-coloured sprigged cotton, with long sleeves, and they both laughed while I was putting it on, with the blue linsey petticoat, repeating at least half a dozen times, "You never had on the like of that before." They held a consultation of several minutes over a pair of coarse woolen stockings. At last, with great diffidence, they offered them to me, adding, as before, that I had never worn the like of them. I never think of the two girls, but the whole image of that romantic spot is before me, a living image, as it will be to my dying day. The following poem was written by William, not long after our return from Scotland.
Extract from To a Highland Girl. Sweet Highland girl, a very shower of beauty is thy earthly dower. Twice 7 consenting years have shed their utmost bounty on thy head, and these grey rocks, this household lawn, these trees, a veil just half withdrawn, this fall of water that doth make a murmur near the silent lake, this little bay, a quiet road that holds in shelter thy abode, in truth, together ye do seem like something fashioned in a dream, such forms as from their covert peep when earthly cares are laid asleep. Yet, dream and vision as thou art, I bless thee with a human heart. God shield thee to thy latest years. I neither know thee nor thy peers, and yet my eyes are filled with tears. Now thanks to heaven, that of its grace hath led me to this lonely place. Joy have I had, and going hence I bear away my recompense. In spots like these it is we prize our memory, feel that she hath eyes. Then why should I be loath to stir? I feel this place is made for her, to give new pleasure like the past, continued long as life shall last. Nor am I loath, though pleased at heart, sweet Highland girl, from thee to part. For I, methinks, till I grow old, as fair before me shall behold, as I do now, the cabin small, the lake, the bay, the waterfall, and thee, the spirit of them all.
Wednesday, August the 31st. We had a long day's journey before us, without a regular baiting place on the road, so we breakfasted at Inverary and did not set off till 9 o'clock, having, as usual, to complain of the servants. Our road was up the valley behind the castle. We travelled several miles under the plantations. We travelled on, and saw nothing remarkable till we came in view of Loch Awe, a large lake far below us, among high mountains. After walking down the hill a long way, we came to a bridge under which the water dashed through a dark channel of rocks among the trees. Close upon the bridge was a small hamlet, a few houses near together and huddled up in trees. We had been told at Inverary that we should come to a place where we might give our horse a feed of corn, and found on inquiry that there was a little public house here, or rather a hut, where they kept a dram. It was a cottage, like all the rest, without a signboard. The woman of the house helped to take the horse out of harness, and being hungry, we asked her if she could make us some porridge, to which she replied that we should get that, and I followed her into the house and sat over the hearth while she was making it. As to fire, there was little sign of it, save the smoke, for a long time, she having no fuel but green wood, and no bellows but her breath. My eyes smarted exceedingly, but the woman seemed so kind and cheerful that I was willing to endure it for the sake of warming my feet in the ashes and talking to her. The fire was in the middle of the room, a crook being suspended from a cross beam, and a hole left at the top for the smoke to find its way out. We asked the woman what we should pay her, and were not a little surprised when she answered, 3 shillings. Our horse had had a 6-penny feed of miserable corn, not worth 3d. The rest of the charge was for skimmed milk, oat bread, porridge, and blue milk cheese. We told her it was far too much, and giving her half a crown, departed. Wednesday, September 7th. Rose early, and went before breakfast to the Duke of Athol's gardens and pleasure grounds, where we completely tired ourselves with a 3 hours' walk. Having been directed to see all the waterfalls, we submitted ourselves to the gardener, who dragged us from place to place, calling our attention to, it might be 6, I cannot say how many, dripping streams, very pretty in themselves, but generally robbed of their grace by the obtrusive ornaments which were first seen. The whole neighbourhood, a great country, seems to belong to the Duke of Athol. In his domain are hills and mountains, glens and spacious plains, rivers and innumerable torrents. Thursday, September the 8th. Before breakfast, we walked to the pass of Killiecrankie, a very fine scene. The River Garry forcing its way down a deep chasm between rocks at the foot of high, rugged hills covered with wood to great height. Everybody knows that this pass is famous in military history. When we were travelling in Scotland, an invasion was hourly looked for, and one could not but think with some regret of the times when from the now depopulated Highlands 40 or 50,000 men might have been poured down for the defence of the country. I will transcribe a sonnet suggested to William by this place.
6,000 veterans, practised in war's game, tried men, at Killiecrankie were arrayed against an equal host that wore the plaid, shepherds and herdsmen. Like a whirlwind came the Highlanders, the slaughter spread like flame, and Garry, thundering down his mountain road, was stopped, and could not breathe beneath the load of the dead bodies. 'Twas a day of shame for them whom precept and the pedantry of cold mechanic battle do enslave. Oh, for a single hour of that Dundee, who on that day the word of onset gave! Like conquest might the men of England see, and her foes find a like inglorious grave.
Thursday, September the 15th. Nothing very interesting till we came to Edinburgh. Arrived at Edinburgh a little before sunset. drove to the White Hart in the Grassmarket, an inn which had been mentioned to us and which we conjectured would better suit us than one in a more fashionable part of the town. It was not noisy and tolerably cheap. Friday, September the 16th. We set out upon our walk and went through many streets to Holyrood House, and thence to the hill called Arthur's Seat, a high hill very rocky at the top, and below covered with smooth turf on which sheep were feeding. We climbed up till we came to St. Anthony's Well and Chapel. We sat down on a stone, not far from the chapel, overlooking a pastoral hollow as wild and solitary as any in the heart of the Highland Mountains. There, instead of roaring torrents, we listened to the noises of the city, which were blended in one loud, indistinct buzz. When we found ourselves once again in the streets of the city, we lamented over the heavy rain. We walked industriously through the streets, street after street, and in spite of wet and dirt were exceedingly delighted. The old town, with its irregular houses, stage above stage, hardly resembles the work of men. It is more like a piling up of rocks. Gladly would we have stayed another day, but could not afford more time, and our notions of the weather of Scotland were so dismal that we had no hope of its mending. So at about 6 o'clock in the evening, we departed. Saturday, September the 17th. The morning very fine. We rose early and walked through the glen of Roslin, past Hawthornden, to the house of Mr. Walter Scott at Lasswade. Roslin Castle stands upon a woody bank above a stream, the North Esk. We look down upon the ruin from higher ground. Near it stands the chapel, a most elegant building, a ruin, though the walls and roof are entire. Arrived at Lasswade before Mr. and Mrs. Scott had risen, and waited some time in a large sitting-room, breakfasted with them, and stayed till 2 o'clock, and Mr. Scott accompanied us back almost to Roslin. We ordered dinner on our return to the inn, and went to view the inside of the chapel of Roslin, which is kept locked up and so preserved from the injuries it might otherwise receive from idle boys. The architecture within is exquisitely beautiful. The stone both of the roof and walls is sculptured with leaves and flowers so delicately wrought that I could have admired them for hours, and the whole of their groundwork is stained by time with the softest colours. Some of those leaves and the flowers were tinged perfectly green, and at one part the effect was most exquisite. 3 or 4 leaves of a small fern grew round a cluster of them at the top of a pillar, and the natural product and the artificial were so intermingled that at first it was not easy to distinguish the living plant from the other. Wednesday, September the 21st. The house where we lodged was airy and even cheerful, though one of a line of houses bordering on the churchyard. The churchyard was full of graves and exceedingly slovenly and dirty. One most indecent practice I observed. Several women brought their linen to the flat-tabled tombstones, and having spread it upon them, began to batter as hard as they could with a wooden roller, a substitute for a mangle. Saturday, September the 24th. Rose very early and travelled about 9 miles to Longtown before breakfast, along the banks of the Esk. About half a mile from Langholm, crossed a bridge. At this part of the vale, which is narrow, the steeps are covered with old oaks and every variety of trees. We did not look along the white line of the road to Solway Moss without some melancholy emotion, though we had the fair prospect of the Cumberland Mountains full in view, with the certainty, barring accidents, of reaching our own dear home the next day. Sunday, September the 25th, 1803. A beautiful autumnal day. Breakfasted at a public house by the roadside, dined at Threlkeld, arrived at home between 8 and 9 o'clock, where we found Mary in perfect health, and little John asleep in the clothes basket by the fire.
Fly, some kind spirit, fly to Grasmere Vale. Say that we come, and come by this day's light. Glad tidings, spread them over field and height, but chiefly let one cottage hear the tale. There let a mystery of joy prevail. The kitten frolic with unruly might, and Rover whine as at a second sight of near approaching good that will not fail. And from that infant's face let joy appear. Yea, let our Mary's one companion child, that hath her 6 weeks' solitude beguiled with intimations manifold and dear, while we have wandered over wood and wild, smile on its mother now with bolder cheer.
Tuesday evening, the 6th of March, 7:30, 1804. To Samuel Taylor Coleridge. My dear friend, we have waited post after post in expectation of another letter from you. In so doing, I feel that we have done wrong, for I begin to write now as a duty rather than a work of pleasure and sympathy. But why have you not written us again? We learn from Sarah Hutchinson that you have seen Dr. Beddoes, from which we conclude that you have returned to London, and as she says nothing to the contrary, that you were tolerably well. We have transcribed all William's smaller poems for you, and have begun the poem on his life and The Pedlar. But before we send them off, we mean to take another copy for ourselves, for they are scattered about here and there, in this book and in that. My head aches so. Dearest Coleridge, forgive me for sending you a short and meagre letter. Mary and I have been spending 2 hours this afternoon among crowds of men, women and children, with the smell of gin, rum, brandy and tobacco, and endless din all about us. In the morning, William and I had so much enjoyment that regrets forced themselves on us continually that you were not with us, at least had not seen the place where we were. Mary is to go tomorrow. William found it out by himself. It is a little slip of the river above Rydal that makes the famous waterfalls, about 200 yards in length. It is high up towards the mountains, where one would not have expected any trees to be, and down it tumbles among rocks and trees of all shapes, elegant birches and ancient oaks that have grown as tall as the storms would let them, and are now decaying away, their naked branches like shattered lances. Mary, though very thin and not very strong, is on the whole well. The babe is flourishing and healthy. He is indeed as noble a creature as ever was beheld, the joy and comfort of us all. You will be delighted to hear that he is far more happy when we leave him to himself upon the carpet with a good store of playthings than when he is upon our knees. Give him but a work-basket full of tape and thread and other oddments, and he riots among them like a little pussy-cat. His countenance is very intelligent. Could you but see him look up at you when he is sitting upon the ground, it would fill your heart top-full of pleasure. Farewell, my beloved friend. William, who is sitting beside me reading Hamlet. We are both at the little green table by the fireside, the watch ticking above our heads. Mary is with the sleeping baby below stairs, writing to Sarah. William exhorts me to give over writing, so farewell, my dearest Coleridge. May God bless you and your faithful and affectionate Dorothy Wordsworth. March the 29th, 1804. My dearest Coleridge, our hearts are full of you. May God preserve you and restore you to us in health of body and peace of mind. I cannot express to you how deeply we were shocked at your late terrible attack. We have had the severest gales of wind that we remember this winter in the beginning of the week. At first we did not know but that you might be out of sea in them, and we were happy indeed to hear that you were not. William has begun another part of the poem addressed to you. He has written some very affecting lines which I wish you could have taken with you. He is perfectly well at present, works in the garden and walks daily. Today, Mary, John, William and I had a walk together in Bainriggs, and after we left William, he wrote 20 lines in the 3/4 of an hour before dinner.
Grasmere, February the 11th, 1805. To Sir George Beaumont. My dear friend, the public papers will already have broken the shock which the sight of this letter will give you. You will have learned by them the loss of the Earl of Abergavenny, East Indiaman, and, along with her, of a great proportion of the crew, and her captain, our brother John. A most beloved brother he was. This calamitous news we received at 2 o'clock today, and I write to you from a house of mourning. My poor sister, and my wife, who loved him almost as we did, for he was the most amiable of men, are in miserable affliction, which I do all in my power to alleviate. But heaven knows I want consolation myself. I can say nothing higher of my ever-dear brother than that he was worthy of his sister, who is now weeping beside me.
Grasmere, March the 16th, 1805. To Mrs. Marshall. It does me good to weep for him, and it does me good to find that others weep, and I bless them for it. He was taken away in the freshness of his manhood. Pure he was, and innocent as a child. Never human being was more thoroughly modest, and his courage I need not speak of. He was seen speaking with apparent cheerfulness to the first mate a few minutes before the ship went down. And when nothing more could be done, he said, "The will of God be done." I have no doubt that when he felt that it was out of his power to save his life, he was as calm as before. He loved solitude, and he rejoiced in society. He would wander alone amongst these hills with his fishing rod, or led on by the mere pleasure of walking for many hours, or he would walk with William or me, or both of us, and was continually pointing out something which perhaps would have escaped our observation. He loved our cottage. He helped us furnish it, and to make the garden. Trees are growing now which he planted. He stayed with us till the 29th of September. During that time, Mary Hutchinson, now Mary Wordsworth, stayed with us 6 weeks. John used to walk with her everywhere, and they were exceedingly attached to each other. And so my poor sister mourns with us. I honour him and love him and glory in his memory. Easter Tuesday, 1818. To Taylor Coleridge. My dearest Sarah, we left Rydal precisely at 12:15, halted 3/4 of an hour at Staveley, and reached Kendal at 5:15 o'clock. I give you these particulars for the sake of our dear friend Mrs. Luff, who will be glad to hear that at 46 I can walk 16 miles in 4 hours and 3/4, with short rests in between, on a blustering cold day, without having felt any fatigue. Except for the first half hour after my entrance into the house at my journey's end, when my body remembered the force of the blast and I was exhausted. Extracts from the Tour on the Continent of 1820. Monday, July the 10th, 1820. We, William, Mary and Dorothy Wordsworth, left the Rectory House, Lambeth, at 7:45 o'clock, had the Union coach to ourselves till within 2 stages of Canterbury, when 2 young ladies demanded inside places. The Cathedral of Canterbury looks stately on the plain, and appeared to me a much finer building than in former times, and I felt that whatever change tending to melancholy 20 years might have produced, they had called forth the capacity of enjoying the sight of ancient buildings to which my youth was, comparatively, a stranger. Calais, Tuesday, July the 11th. Landed on the shores of France at 1:30. What shall I say of Calais? I looked about for what I remembered, and looked for new things, and in both quests was gratified. On my bedroom door is inscribed Stern's room, and a print of him hangs over the fireplace. The walls painted in panels, handsome carpets, chimney-piece marble-coloured. The bell hangs on the outside of the wall and gives single loud dull stroke when pulled by the string, so that you must stand and pull 4 or 5 times, as if you were calling people to prayers. Saturday, July the 15th. Arrival at Brussels. Passing through a heavy gateway, we entered the city and drove through street after street with a pleasure wholly new to us. Garlands of fresh boughs and flowers and festoons hung on each side, and the great height of the houses, especially in the narrow streets, lighted as they were, gave a beautiful effect to the exhibition. Sunday, July the 16th. Brussels. After breakfast, proceeded through the park, a very large open space with shady walks, statues, fountains, pools, arbours and seats, and surrounded by palaces and fine houses. To the cathedral, which, though immensely large, was so filled with people that we could scarcely make our way, so as by standing upon chairs, for which we paid 2 sous each, to have a view of the building over multitudes of heads. The priests at high mass could not be seen, but the melody of human voices accompanied by the organ pierced through every recess. Then came bursts of sound like thunder, and at times the solemn rousing of the trumpet. Powerful as was the effect of the music, the excessive heat and crowding after a short while overcame every other feeling, and we were glad to go into the open air. Our laquais de place conducted us to the house of a shopkeeper, where from a room in the attics we might view the procession. It was close to one of the triangular openings with which most of the streets of Brussels terminate. To the right, we looked down the street along which the procession was to come, and a little to the left below us overlooked the triangles in the centre of which was a fountain ornamented with 3 marbled statues, and a pillar in the midst topped by a golden ball, the whole decorated with festoons of holly and large roses made of paper, alternately red and yellow. Paintings were hung out by such as possessed them, and ribbons and flags. The street where we were was lined with people assembled like ourselves in expectation, all in their best attire. The windows of all the houses open, and people seen at full length or through doorways, sitting or standing in patient expectation. The procession was in its beginning military, and its approach announced by the sound of trumpets. Then came a troop of cavalry, 4 abreast, splendidly accoutred, dressed in blue and gold, and accompanied by a full band of music. Long before the sound of the sacred service reached our ears, the martial music had died away in the distance. The contrast was very pleasing when the solemn chaunting came along the street with a stream of banners. Priests and choristers in their appropriate robes, and not the least pleasing part of it was a great number of young girls, 2 and 2, all dressed in white frocks. The sun seemed to be feasting on the gorgeous colours and glittering banners. Monday, July the 17th. Waterloo. Waterloo is a mean village. Straggling on each side of the broad highway, children and poor people of all ages stood on the watch to conduct us to the church. Within the circle of its interior are found several mural monuments to our brave soldiers, long lists of naked names inscribed on marble slabs, not less moving than laboured epitaphs displaying the sorrow of surviving friends. Here we took up the very man, Lacoste, whose name will make a figure in history. He had been tied upon a horse as Bonaparte's guide through the country previous to the battle, and was compelled to stay by his side till the moment of flight. Frankfurt, Wednesday, July the 26th. The town is large, though you do not feel as if you were walking in a large town. Standing on a perfect level, you see no further than the street in which you are, or the one that leads to it, and there is little stirring of people. We went to the cathedral, a very large but not otherwise remarkable building in the interior. We ascended the tower. It is enormously high, and after an ascent of above 500 steps, we found a family living in as neatly furnished a set of apartments as need be seen in any street in Frankfurt. A baby in the cradle smiled upon us. The mother was alert and cheerful, nay, she seemed to glory in her contentment and in the snugness of her abode. I said to her, "But when the wind blows fiercely, how terrible!" And she replied, "Oh, nein, us that nicht." Oh, no, it does no harm. The view from the cathedral is very extensive. The windings of the River Main, vessels in their harbours or smoothly gliding, plains of corn, of forest, of fruit trees, chateaux, villages, towns, towers and spires, the expanse irregularly bounded by distinct mountains. Thursday, August the 3rd, Zurich. At a little distance from Zurich, we remarked a very fine oak tree. Under its shade stood a little building, like an oratory, but as we were not among the Roman Catholics, it puzzled us. In front of the tree was an elevated platform, resembling the mount at Ryle, to be ascended by steps. The postilion told us the building was a chapel, whither condemned criminals retired to pray, and there had their hair cut off, and that the platform was the place of execution. Brienz, Wednesday, August the 9th. There was something in the exterior of the people belonging to the inn at Brienz that reminded one of the ferry houses in the Highlands, a sort of untamed familiarity with strangers and an expression of savage fearlessness in danger. While we were waiting at the door, a company of females came up, returning from harvest labours in the Vale of Burn to their homes at the head of the lake. They gathered round, eyeing us steadily, and presently a girl began to sing. Another joined, a third, a fourth, and then a fifth, their arms gracefully laid over each other's shoulders. Large black or straw hats shaded their heads, undecked with ribbons, and their attire was grey. The air they sang was plaintive and wild, without sweetness, yet not harsh. Our minstrel peasants passed us on the water, no longer singing plaintive ditties, but with bursts of merriment they rowed lustily away. Scene on the Lake of Brienz by William Wordsworth.
What know we of the blessed above, but that they sing, and that they love? Yet, if they ever did inspire a mortal hymn, or shaped the choir, now, where those harvest damsels float homeward in their rugged boat, while all the ruffling winds are fled, each slumbering on some mountain's head, now, surely, hath that gracious aid been felt, that influence displayed. Pupils of heaven, in order stand the rustic maidens, every hand upon a sister's shoulder laid, to chant, as angels do above, the melodies of peace in love.
Top of Rigi, Saturday, August the 19th. At Goldau the valley desolation begins. It bears the name of the former village buried in ruins, and is now no more than 3 or 4 houses and a church built on the same site. Masses of barren rubbish lie close to the houses, where but a few years past nothing was seen but fruitful fields. We dined at the inn, and were waited on by the landlady, whose headdress was truly surprising. She wore, from the back of the neck to the forehead, a cap shaped like a one-arched bridge, with high parapets of stiff muslin, the path of the bridge covered with artificial flowers. Wondrously unbecoming, for she was a plain woman, not young, and her hair, I think powdered, was drawn tight up from her forehead. She served us with very small fish from the lake, excellently cooked, boiled milk, eggs, an omelette and dessert. From the room where we dined, we had a view of the Lake of Zong. Yes, from a window in that house, on its desolate site, we beheld this lovely prospect, and nothing of the desolation. Friday, August the 24th. Arola, 3,800 feet above the sea. I walked out, but neglected to enter the church, and missed a pleasure William has often spoken of. He found a congregation of rustics chanting the service, the men and the women, alternately, unaccompanied by a priest. Cascades of pure, unsullied water tumble down the hills in every conceivable variety of form and motion. Thursday, September the 6th. Cadenabbia. William, Mary and I set off toward Menagio along the terrace bordering the water. We had been overtaken by a fine, tall man who somewhat proudly addressed us in English. After 20 years' traffic in our country, he had been settled near his native place on the banks of Como, having purchased an estate near Cadenabbia with the large sum of £2,000 he acquired by selling barometers, looking-glasses, etc. Portsmouth and Plymouth were the grand marts for his wares. He amused us with recitals of adventures among the sailors, who used to bully him with, "Come, you rogue, you get your money easily enough, spend it freely." And he did not care if he got rid of a guinea or two, for he was sure to have it back again after one of the frolics, and much more. They would often clear away his whole stock of knick-knacks. This industrious trader used to travel on foot at the rate of from 30 to 40 miles a day, and his expenses from London to Como were but 3 guineas, though it cost him 1/3 of that sum to get to Calais. He said he liked the English because the people were honest, and told us some stories illustrative of English honesty and Italian overreaching in bargains. This amusing companion turned from us by a side path before we reached Menaggio. Friday, September the 14th, Martigny. Oh, that I could describe, nay, that I could remember the sublime spectacles of the pinnacles and towers of Mont Blanc while we were travelling through the vale. A large body of moving clouds covered a portion of the side of the mountain. The pinnacles and towers above seemed as if they stood in the sky, of no soft aerial substance, but appearing, even at that great distance, as they really are. Huge masses of solid stone, raised by almighty power and never, but by the same power, to be destroyed. Saturday, September the 29th. Fontainebleau. In the very heart of the Alps. I never saw a more wild and lonely spot, yet curious in the extreme, and even beautiful. Thousands of white bleached rocks, mostly in appearance not much larger than the sheep, lay on the steep declivities of the dell among bushes and low trees, heathers, bilberries and other forest plants. The effect of loneliness and desert wildness was indescribably increased by the remembrance of the palace we had left not an hour before. The spot on which we stood is said to have been frequented by Henry IV when he wished to retire from his court and attendants. The sunset was brilliant. Light clouds in the west and overhead a spotless blue dome. As we wind along the top of the steep, the views are still changing. The plain expands eastward and again appear the white buildings of Fontainebleau, with something of romantic brightness in the fading light, for we had tarried till a star or two reminded us it was time to move away. Monday, October the 29th. Boulogne. We walked to Bonaparte's pillar, which, on the day when he harangued his soldiers, pointing to the shores of England whither he should lead them to conquest, he decreed should be erected in commemoration of the Legion of Honour. The pillar is seen far and wide, unfinished. It is said the Bourbons intend to complete the work and give it a new name. On the day fixed for our departure from Boulogne, the weather being boisterous and the wind contrary, the packet could not sail, and we trusted ourselves to a small vessel with only one effective sailor on board. Even Mary was daunted by the breakers outside the harbour, and I descended into the vessel as unwillingly as a criminal might go to execution, and hid myself in bed. Presently our little ship moved, and before 10 minutes were gone she struck upon the sands. I felt that something disastrous had happened, but I knew not what till poor Mary appeared in the cabin, having been thrown down from the top of the steps. There was again a frightful beating and grating of the bottom of the vessel, water rushing in very fast. A young man, an Italian, who had risen from a bed beside mine, was pale as ashes, groaned in agony, kneeling at his prayers. My condition was not much better than his, but I was more quiet. Never shall I forget the kindness of a little Irishwoman, who, though she herself, as she afterwards said, was much frightened, assured me, even cheerfully, that there was no danger. I cannot say that her words, as assurances of safety, had much effect upon me, but the example of her courage made me become more collected, and I felt her human kindness even at the moment when I believed that we might all be going to the bottom of the sea together. And the agonizing thoughts of the distress at home were rushing on my mind. Rydal Mount, the 9th of January, 1830. To Charles and Mary Lamb. My dear friends, my nephew John will set off tomorrow evening to Oxford to take his Master of Arts degree and thence proceed to London. I do not ask you, Miss Lamb, to write, for I know you dislike the office, but, dear Charles, I trust I do not in vain entreat you to let me have the eagerly desired letter. Tell us all of whom you know, in whom you know us also to be interested, but above all, be very minute in what regards your own dear selves. Wishes I do now and then indulge of at least revisiting Switzerland, and again crossing the Alps, and even strolling on to Rome. But there is a great change in my feelings respecting plans for the future. If we make any, I entertain them as an amusement perhaps for a short while, but never set my heart upon anything which is to be accomplished 3 months hence, and have no satisfaction whatever in schemes. When one has lived almost 60 years, one is satisfied with present enjoyment and thankful for it, without daring to count on what is to be done 6 months hence. My brother and sister are both in excellent health. In him there is no failure, except the tendency to inflammation in his eyes, which disables him from reading much or at all by candlelight, and the use of the pen is irksome to him. However, he has a most competent and willing amanuensis in his daughter, who takes all labour from mother's and aged aunt's hands. His muscular powers are in no degree diminished. Indeed, I think he walks regularly more than ever. He is still the crack skater on Rydal Lake, and as to climbing of mountains, the hardiest and the youngest are yet hardly a match for him. I have told you my sister is well, and indeed I think her much stronger than a few years ago. Now that I am for the whole of this winter set aside as a walker, she takes my place, and will return from an 8 miles walk with my brother, unfatigued.
February the 5th, 1833. To Henry Crabb Robinson. My dear sister has not left her room for 5 weeks, and scarcely her bed, but to return to it. She is, you will grieve to hear, deplorably weak, and cannot, we fear, remain long with us. But do not speak of this to anybody further than to say she is very poorly.
Monday, January the 13th, 1834. To Lady Beaumont. I will not tire you with explanations of the causes of my long silence, and still less would I burthen you with excuse and apology. But in justice to Rydal Mount, I must take upon myself the blame for the long silence kept up by the whole household, for it belongs to me alone. It was the fullness of my gratitude which impelled me to assure my sister that I would myself write when she offered, as she has too often been obliged to do, to write for me. You may believe that during the long time past, since you so kindly wrote to me, there have been many days in which, as an invalid, I have not been able to use my pen. Wednesday, January the 15th. I began my letter on too large a scale, by which, my dear Lady Beaumont, you are no gainer. I was obliged to put aside my paper, and have been unable to go on from various causes until this day. I somewhat boldly did once hope that I might next spring be able to visit Cambridge and Colley Orton, but now I feel that home is likely to be the place for me. And no hardship, for my prison is one of the prettiest and most cheerful in England, including what is to be seen from the windows. And I have no bodily oppression but from weakness, with occasional fits of uneasy pain that is not violent. April the 12th, 1834. To Mrs. Pollard. You will forgive me, for a solitary bedchamber does not furnish a variety of incidents. Solitary, I call it, but my friends are very kind, and sit with me as much and as often as leisure will allow, except when the fear of fatiguing me keeps them away. Sometimes, of late, I have chid myself for impatience, for the sun shines so bright and the birds sing so sweetly that I have an almost painful longing to go out of doors, and am half tempted to break my bonds and sally forth into the garden. Strange to say it, this poor scrawl has been the work of 4 days. Begun Monday, 18th October, 1834. To Mrs. Clarkson. My dear friend, if autumnal cold and dampness had not come on, I think I should now be able to walk far enough to have a look at the prospect from the old terrace. But cold is my horror. so I must not execute this large scheme till we have spring breezes and sunshine. Whenever the weather allows it, I continue to go out daily, either in the family phaeton, which is dragged by one of the steadiest and best of horses, guided by a very skilful driver, my dear niece, or the manservant takes me round and round the garden, and upon the lower new-made green terrace in a bath chair. Rydal Mount, 7th May, 1836. Mary Wordsworth to Mrs. Marshall. Dear Dorothy is now asleep, after having been half an hour in the garden, drawn by James in the garden chair and attended by Dora, Jane, and myself. On first going out, she wept aloud like a baby, being overcome by the beauty around her, and asked to be taken to a certain border, whence she has lately been supplied with flowers. At first she was too overpowered to look upon it. Afterward she became calm and enjoyed everything she saw, like her old self. Then, being brought homeward, a new sensation was created when she reached the shady green lawn. On a sudden, she began to sing, which she continued to do till James took her into the house.